Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Samach in Zbachim, as we are about halfway done with this Masechet, halfway through. Shouldn't say done, halfway through, right? Kuf Chav, I think it's 120 blot or 119. So we're up to about the halfway part. All right, we're about halfway down on the page. Amar Rava, Mother of Yehuda B'dam. What are we speaking about? Yesterday we had the discussion. We had a machlokus between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. What was the story with Shlomo HaMelech there? What did he do? Was he makdish the whole floor? He had so many sacrifices to bring that he had to bring them even on the floor of the mizbech. Now the shechita, of course, is on the floor. You don't shecht it on the car. We said if you shecht it on the top of the mizbech, it has a halacha. It's valid, but that's not the primary place to do it. You do it either if it's kashim kashim, do it on the north. If it's kashim kashim, you do it anywhere, but it's on the floor of the azara. So it says there that he was makdish the whole floor apparently, so that you could be makriv. In other words, you could burn the karbanos there on the floor, not on the mizbeach, because there wasn't enough room on the mizbeach. That's how Rabbi Yehuda learned. Said Rabbi Yossi, no. Moshe Rabbeinu's, remember, fireplace was 1/400th, and his mizbeach was 1/400th of the size of Shlomo HaMelech's. So there was plenty of room. What he was makdish his own mizbeach, the mizbeach adamah, the mizbeach made out of stone that Shlomo HaMelech built in the permanent base of Mikdash, not the Mishkan that went from place to place, but in the permanent base of Mikdash. That was plenty big, but he was makdish it. Okay, so that was the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda said that he was makdish the whole floor. Rabbi Yossi said that no, he wasn't makdish the whole floor. He was just makdish the main mizbech, the big mizbech that he built. That's what we said. Then comes along to say at the end of yesterday's daf, we said like this, that what happens if you have a carbon, right? A carbon that was you shechted it when the base of Mikdash was broken, was damaged. No good. It's no good. Machlokas one said even if it's there while it's in the base of Mikdash, in other words, it was already puzzled before, even if you didn't shecht it there. But Rav said if you shechted it while the base of Mikdash was not there, was not complete, it was broken, it's no good, it's puzzled, disqualified. Okay. Then we had, how could that be? Rav Gidl says, Rav Gidl Marab Mizbeach Shenekar Maktir Tos Mikomo. If Mizbeach that was removed, here we're speaking about the Mizbeach Hapnimi, the inner mizbeach. It's called the mizbeach hazov, mizbeach haktoris, the small mizbeach, 1 amma by 1 amma inside the heichal, where they burnt the ketoris there every day on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur rather. They sprinkled dam on that mizbeach. He says that mizbeach that was removed, shenekar, you could be makrit on the floor where the mizbeach was on the inner one, So therefore, why shouldn't it be the same on the outer one? Why do you say if the mizbeach is damaged or removed, it's possible if you shechted the carbon while the mizbeach was damaged? What do you mean? On the inner mizbeach, even if it's missing, you could just do it on the floor there. What's the problem? So the Gemara said, I'm repeating from yesterday's daf on Nun Tesam and Alf. So like Rav is going to say, that means Rav that we're going to have today on today's daf. We saw it at the end of yesterday's daf. We're going to see it today. Rabbi Yehuda's moda, even though we said that in our case that we have a machlokas here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. All right, we have a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi whether Shlomo HaMelech sanctified the entire floor of the Azara or did he not? Rabbi Yehuda said he sanctified the whole floor. Wasn't enough space, he sanctified the whole floor. The difference between Moshe Rabbeinu's and Shlomo's, yes, Shlomo was much larger, but not 400 times the size. Much bigger, but not enough. So he sanctified the whole floor. Even though he sanctified the whole floor, Rabbi Yehuda says Rava, Moda Rabbi Yehuda b'damim. When it comes to the blood, you can't put the blood on the floor. You could burn the emurim, you can burn the fats on the floor. You know, so you can make a bigger fireplace. You could turn the whole floor of the Azara into a fireplace. But you can't sprinkle the dam on the floor. That's what he said, right? So just like in the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. What did Shlomo Melech sanctify? And Rabbi Yehuda said he sanctified the whole floor, even though he sanctified for only for burning, not for dam. Pardon? Yeah, that's right. But we're talking about for zrika of the dam. Whatever dam fell on the floor by chance when he did shchita, supposed to do it get it in the bowl in the mizrak, but whatever fell on the floor, that goes into the garbage. That drains out. Okay, so just like Rav said, Moder Rabbi Yehuda, but Damim hachanami in our case too, Moder Rav who said what? Rav said that he started this whole thing by saying that if you shechted it while the mizbeach was damaged, it's no good, right? It's no good. Right? Just like he said over there, so Rav is moda, right? When it comes to the dam, that the dam has to be only where on the mizbeach. In other words, we start off by saying in middle of the daf, Amarav mizbeach shnifkam kol kashum psulim, right? The puzzle. Okay, we get it. You said, what do you mean? That even if the Mizbeach is not there, the inner Mizbeach, you could still put the Ketores there? The same thing. Even though Rav Gilel Marav said that if you remove the inner Mizbeach, you could burn the stuff on the floor of the Heichal. Yeah, that's burning stuff. Burning, whether it's the Ketores, the incense, or burning the Emurim, Naktar, that you could do on the floor, but not when it comes to blood. And that's why Rav said that if the mizbeach was damaged and you shechted a carbon there, that's no good because the blood from the carbon, you have to do shchita kabbalah lachas rika, remember, on the same day. And if you shechted it while it was damaged, you can't sprinkle the blood there, and therefore he's moted to that. That's what we said. That's what we said yesterday. Then we went on to explain the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Now we come back to Samach Amud Aleph, halfway down the page. We said, Amarava, Mod Rabbi Yehuda b'tamim, even though Rabbi Yehuda said that Shlomo Melech said he sanctified the whole floor for burning, that's for burning, but not for the blood. Did Tanya, how do we know that? How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda's motive when it comes to the dam? Listen to it carefully. And this is not going to be 100%, but this we're going to slug it up a little bit. But he said, Rav has felt that Rabbi Yehuda's motive to the dam, even though we're going to slug up and say that maybe Rabbi Yehuda was not really motive to the damim when it comes to the dam, when it comes to stuff on the floor, just burning on the floor, but Rav could still say that. Rav could say that when it comes to the blood, if the mizbeach is not there, you can't sprinkle the blood, and therefore the carbon is no good. Where do we see that Rabbi Yehuda said motiv dam? Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda halfway down on Samacham of Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kosech. We had this several times in Shas. We had it in Mesachim. We had it already in this Masechah too. Rabbi Yehuda holds like this. Remember on Carbon Pesach, everybody always asks, how do they do the Carbon Pesach? Thousands of carbonos, millions of people are there. What's going on? Well, there's a big balagan, and they had a what's it called when you have one person passes it to another, down. They pass the blood, pass the thing back, all that stuff with a chain. So when you have that whole mess, it's possible that somebody's blood spilt out. A guy was looking, he was looking, hey, what's going on? Oh, he spilled the blood. So what do you do in case? He said like this, Rabbi Yehuda said, in case somebody's blood was spilt out, there were thousands of carbonos, and if the blood of your carbon was not sprinkled on mizbeach, you're not allowed to eat the carbon, we learn, right? So he said what they did at the end of the day was they took one cup and they filled it up from, remember the blood was up to their ankles in depth. They closed it up, and you shouldn't feel that it's dirty. That dam is like, that's part of the carbon. You have to rejoice in the avoda. They took one cup and they bent over and picked up a cup of blood, which presumably was all mingled, all the blood of all different carbonos was there. Right. So therefore, and then they poured that on the mizbeach. So okay, in case yours was spilt, there's some blood in there that was yours also, right? Even if it's a drop. So it was from the blood that was mixed up there. And you pour it on mizbeach. In case one of them was spilt out. So here you're machshir the blood this way, and then everybody can eat their carbon on Leil Seder. That's when you eat the carbon, right? Now, you can't eat it right away, right? You do the carbon on Erev Pesach in the afternoon, but you can't eat it till the nighttime, right? That's what we learn in the end of Ezer Makomet. Simpson said machshira. Isak that's Rabbi Yehuda Kula Azara Mikdasha. If Rabbi Yehuda holds really that the whole floor of the Azara, the whole floor, Shlomo Melech was makdish the whole floor of the Azara, and you could be You could burn there and you could do blood there. Hasabda mitzvasa. What's the problem? It's already on the floor. If you hold that the floor is also kadosh, what do you have to pick up a cup for and pour it on a mizbeach? It's already on the floor. The whole floor is okay. What do you have to do for it? Maybe out this. You have to sprinkle it or pour it by the carbon pesach. It could be poured on the whole because he only needs one shvich, and that could be poured on there. Maybe else it's got to be via human force. It can't be that it just spilled out by mistake. Maybe they picked it up, even though the blood was on the floor. Maybe you need a human force to do it. Maybe that's why you needed it. In other words, maybe the floor of the azar is okay for blood too, but the reason he poured it is because you got to do human force. If that's the case, pick it up and pour it right back down. Well, if you're picking it up the floor and you say you need human force to do it, so why do you have to pick it up and go over to the mizbeach? Just pick it up and pour it right back. But maybe you want to do it the best way. It's true. Maybe Shlomo Melech really was makdish the whole floor, even for the blood. But the best way to do it is on the mizbeach. So therefore, it's not a solid proof that Rabbi Yehuda holds that when Shlomo Melech was makdish the whole floor of the Azara, that it was only for burning and not for blood. Maybe it was for blood too. We can't really prove it. But still, Rav can maintain that. And that's why Rav said that if you shechted any carbon while the mizbeach was defective, while it was damaged, it's no good. Amar Blezer. Now listen to this. Let's say the mizbeach was there when you shechted it. You did shchita, kabbalah, and holacha, right? And zrika. Everything was proper. Carbon's good. What do you do now? Now you eat it. Which carbon do you eat? Well, you can eat a Pesach at night, right? Eat a Pesach at night. If it's a shlama, you can eat a shlama, matoda. You could eat, those are things that anybody could eat. A Kohen could eat chatos and osham and shalmei tzibur, right? A bechor is kachim kalim, but the Kohen's going to. But here he says, Rabbi Lezer says a new thing. You can't eat shor mincha. Shor mincha is the leftover part of mincha. Mincha is always also kodesh kodeshim. We've said kodesh kodeshim is an ola, which is totally burned. Chatas and asham, eaten by the Kohen. Kosher kodshim. Shalmei tzibur, also it's a carbon tzibur eaten by the Kohanim. That's also. And mincha. Now he says like this: if the mizbeach is damaged, you can't eat the food either. Ein ochlen begino. In other words, you can't eat because of the mizbeach. You have to normally eat when there's a mizbeach. If there's no mizbeach, you can't eat it. Some shenifgam, if it's damaged, you can't eat mincha. Shenemar, it says v'achlu matzos eitzel mizbeach. You eat the matzos next to the mizbeach. What do you mean next to the mizbeach? Where can you eat kosher kachim? The kosher kachim you're eating, which I said shalmei tzibur, and what? And the what do we say? Shalmei tzibur. Eat. Let's see. Is it listed in the Ezo Makoman, which we say every day you can open up your siddur, right? Right? And then it says the Parmas Rafim Siyam Rafim doesn't really talk about the Shalmei Tzibur, right? So the Shalmei Tzibur presumably, I think, are eaten by the Kohanim also, right? Or eaten by the Kohanim. I have to check that just to be sure. Shalmei Tzibur, I think, would be eaten by the Kohanim, right? Carbon tzibur. It's usually carbon tzibur are burnt, right? But you can have a chatos, whatever, eaten by the Kohanim. Okay. Well, the chatos of a tzibur would be what? Param davar shel tzibur, parkam mashiach. Those are totally burnt. Not sure about shalmei tzibur. Okay, you have to check that. But most karbanos that are eaten by the Kohanim or eaten by the tzibur, only if the mizbeach is there in the child. He says, mizbeach shenifkim enochem begino shir mincha. You can't eat the left part of mincha. In other words, a mincha is kosher kachim. Remember, the Kohen takes the komets, which is like the shchita. He takes it over to the mizbeach, puts it in the kli, takes it over to the mizbeach, and he burns it on there. Then you could eat the rest of the Kohen, eat the rest of it. But you can only eat it if there's a mizbeach. Eat it near the. Now, what do you mean eitzel mizbeach? Where can you eat kosher kachim? Throughout the Azara. You have to shecht it in the north part of the Azara, right? If it's a shchita, right? Like chatas or osham or ola, which isn't eaten, but you have to shecht it in the north part of the Azara. But where is it eaten? Anywhere in the Azara, right? Kachim kalim can be eaten anywhere within the walls of Yerushalayim. Kachim must be eaten inside so you could eat it inside the whole Azara. So what do you mean? You eat it next to the mizbeach. What do you mean next to the? You don't have to eat it next to the mizbeach. You can eat it anywhere in the Azara. Ella means this. Bisman shu sholim v'lo zan shol. V'achlua matzos eitz al mizbeach when the mizbeach is there. If the mizbeach is there when it's complete, then you could eat it. If v'lo is manshu chaser, if the mizbeach is missing, if it's damaged, you can't eat it. Okay, ashkan shari mincha, because it says v'achlua matzos, you eat the mincha only when there's a mizbeach. Katshe kachim. How do I know other katshe kachim? What about chatos and asham? And let's say chatos and asham are classic ones, which are katshe kachim machine. Tamalomar kodesh kodeshim is exever shava. This is called matzah minchas kodesh kodeshim, and so is chatos and asham are also called kodeshim. So you have exever shava. Okay. What about kachim kalam? Can you eat kachim kalam? What's your kachim kalam? Bechor, maser behema. Bechor is eaten by the kohen. Maser behema is eaten by anybody. And Pesach, of course, is also kachim kalam. Now they're eaten in Yerushalayim. You can eat them in all Yerushalayim, but can you eat them if the mizbeach has been damaged? Can you eat them or not? So that's the shaila that we ask over here. That's our question. Kachim kalam minayin. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, I'll tell you how I learned it out. That kachim kalam can they be eaten if the mizbeach is damaged? Amar Abaye asim midrash Rabbi Yossi. I'm going to learn it from Drash Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer. Gimel Dvarim Mishum Gimel Skenim. Rabbi Yossi said 3 different members, 3 different teachings from 3 different elders. The Zechameham. This is one of them. We're going to only be concerned with one of them. Rabbi Shmuel Omer. In other words, he learned 3 things in the name of 3 elders. One of the elders was Rabbi Shmuel. The 3 different elders told him 3 different things, and we're dealing with one of them. What Rabbi Shmuel say? What do you do with Meiser Sheni? You bring it to Yerushalayim. Remember, Meiser Rishon, you give to the 10%, you give to the Levi, right? Of which he has to give 10% of that to the Kohen so he could eat it. Meiser Sheni, which you bring when? In the 1st, 2nd, and 4th and 5th years of the Shemitah cycle, you bring Meiser Sheni. In the 3rd and 6th years, it's Meiser Ani. So Meiser Sheni, what do? You bring it to Yerushalayim. Remember, if you can't bring it to Yerushalayim, it's too heavy, you can change it for money and bring the money to Yerushalayim. Okay, but this manaseh, where you're not being poded or anything like that, what do you do today? Can you give Meiser Sheni today? We take Tumas of Meisros. If he held that, Rashi says the Ksava Kedusha Sa'aretz Lo Batla. The Kedusha is there. In other words, Midaraisa, you have to take Meisers. So can you bring it to Yerushalayim and eat it today? V'dinu, I'll tell you why you shouldn't be able to. Bechor ton havos makam. What do you do with the Bechor? Behema, what do you do before a short cast of waves? You got to bring it to Yerushalayim, give it to the Kohen, and he brings it as a carbon. Bechor ton avos makam, bring it to the Mizbeach, to the base of Migdash. Meiser ton avos makam, just like Bechor is brought to the Mizbeach, Meiser Sheni has to be brought to Yerushalayim. Ma Bechor ein el b'fnei abayis, just like Bechor is only when there's a base of Migdash. How do we know that? We're going to deal with that. How do we know that? Maybe you could even bring it today. We'll see. Af Meiser ein el b'fnei abayis. Meiser is only when there's a base of Migdash. When there's no base of Migdash, you don't bring Meiser Sheni today at all. Even though, in theory, you could bring it to Yerushalayim, eat it within the walls. Says Gemara, no. What? Malu b'chor she can't tell matan damim ve'emurim. B'chor is different. You have to put the dam and the emurim on the mizbeach. You have to pour the dam on the mizbeach, and you sprinkle it, and you have to burn the emurim on the mizbeach. Whereas Meiser Sheni, what do you have to do with it? You bring it to Yerushalayim and you have a meal. That's it. You don't have to bring it. You don't even have to bring it into the base of Mikdash. Okay, so Bikurim, look at Bikurim. Bikurim doesn't require dam. Bikurim means you bring the first fruits of the 7 minim, right? The 7 the grains and the fruits of the Bikurim. You bring it to the base of Mikdash, give it to the Kohen, and he eats it. There's no dam, there's no burning. So Bikurim Mal Bikurim shekain to anacha, but it has to be placed. But right, it says you have to place it in Freinachta Lefnei Hashem Elokecha. You have to put it for the mizbech and put it down. So both of those require coming into the base of Mikdash, and one is with the dam and the murim, one is hanacha. So how do I know that Meiser Sheni you don't bring today? Don't tell me Bechor you have to do dam and a murim, right? You have to burn that stuff. Bechor also, Bikurim requires placing in front of Mizbeach. But maybe today, Meiser Sheni, you have to bring to the base of, you have to bring Yerushalayim and eat it. Talmud Lomer of Avesam Shoma. The pasuk says in Devarim, Perik Yud Beis, pasuk Vav, Avesam Shoma, Olo Sechem v'Zivchechem v'Eis Masro Sechem. We compare Olos and Zbachim, Esmasachem, V'Derechem, Ubechoros, Pekachem, and so on, and Bechor. So we compare all those things together as a Hekesh, right? Talmud Lom, Makish, Meiser Bechor. We compare Meiser Bechor. Ma Bechor Eno B'fnei Abayis, just like Bechor is only when there's a base of Mikdash. Av Meiser Eno B'fnei Abayis. So therefore, you don't bring Meiser either. Now, So what do we have so far? That Meiser, we're talking about Meiser Sheni, that means Meiser of the 5 grains. You don't bring Bisman Azeh. So the Gemara says, though, well, what do I need that pasuk for? You try to learn it from Bechor, and you say Bechor is different because it has Dam and Emurim. You try it from Bikurim, no, Bikurim also needs placing it down for the Mizbeach. But learn it from the combination of both of them. Why do you need the pasuk of the Hekesh, V'neder Dina, V'nesiv B'matzad? Even though you have a pasuk, maybe you don't need that Hekesh. Learn it from a comparison of the two of them, the common denominator of both Bechor and Bikurim. Learn it from them. Those you only bring it when there's a base midrash here too. You could ask this kasha. The common denominator of both is they both have a side of it to the mizbeach. What does that mean? The bechor is sprinkled on the mizbeach, the dam, and the murim are burnt on the mizbeach, and the bikurim are also placed in front of the mizbeach. Whereas, what do you do with meiser sheni? You don't even have to bring it into the base mikdash. You could eat it in Yerushalayim. Okay, so therefore he comes on to the hekesh now. Wait a minute. But he said, how do I know that Meiser Sheni you don't bring it today? Because Bechor you don't bring today, right? Bechor you don't bring today. So here, and we have Hekesh between Bechor and Meiser Sheni. So Gemara says, Mike Sover, what is the Tana, Rabbi Shmuel, who said this when he said, oh, you don't do it because just like Bechor you don't bring here to, you don't bring Bechor, and we have a Hekesh from Bechor to Meiser Sheni, so you don't bring Meiser Sheni today either. Mike Sover, if he holds that what? That the Beis Hamikdash, the Mizbeach, Rashi says, look at Rashi a little bit above, Iksav Kedusha Rishon shall bias of the Beis Hamikdash, Kitchel Shat was always holy. In other words, that it's all holy today. Bisman Hazeh, we really hold that, it could be that the Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash is forever and ever. That's why we don't go there, right? We don't go into the Makam HaMikdash if we you don't go into the Beis Hamikdash today, the place of the Beis Hamikdash, because maybe it's holy and we're tamei, right? So you can't purify. We're all tamei meis, so you don't go in today. By the way, it's not that halachically you can't go in, and the more the Haredi world more or less doesn't go in, and you find many kippos who go to the mikveh and they go in. The issue is not whether you can. The issue is they're not sure exactly where the boundaries are, where exactly was the azara, etc. So, but if Rabbi Shmuel held that the original kedusha of the mizbeach is there for all time, why can't you bring a bechor today? If the base of mikdash, if it's still there, right? Meaning, if the kedusha is still there, in theory, a bechor is kadosh mirachim. You're even makdash it. It's makdash. It's kadosh automatically. Why can't you bring it today also? You can bring it there today also. If you can purify yourself, go bring it today. Rashi says, "Afilu b'chor nami, afilu b'chor yakriv yochal." The man dislike kitcha lasud love, the one who holds that the base mikdash was sanctified for all time, for the future. Is a shemakivin up b'shem bias. You can bring it today also, even though there's no bias. I mean, we go, so you can bring it also. So if he says, so why does he say, how do I know Meiser Sheni you don't bring today in your shrine? Because you don't bring a b'chor, right? You don't bring a b'chor. Maybe you could bring a b'chor too if he holds kitcha lasud. Right, the inami, the iksav, a local shalasab, and if he holds that the base mikdash was not sanctified, why does he ask about Meiser Sheni? Rabbi Shmuel said, Yaim, I think you'd eat Meiser Sheni b'Yerushalayim today. What do you mean? Why not bring a bechor too? Why don't you ask a shayla about bechor just as well as you ask it about Meiser Sheni? Why don't you ask, can you bring a bechor or not? Amravina lolim ksav lo kisha. He also wasn't sanctified. So if it wasn't sanctified, you certainly cannot. If it wasn't sanctified, you can't bring a carbon today. You can't shecht it today. Here, what are we speaking about? But b'chor shenizrek damo kodem churban abayis. Okay. Even the question was v'iksav lo kitchalos levo avachil b'chor nami taboy, and Rashi already told us avachil b'chor nami taboy. What do you mean b'chor taboy? Can you eat it? In other words, can you eat just like you can eat? Questions: can you eat Meiser Sheni today in Yerushalayim? Let's say you had a b'chor that was shechted before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The bechor was there, and you did shechita kabbalah and zrika. And now the question is, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Can you eat it or not? So why don't you ask the same question by bechor? Why you ask about Meiser Sheni? Why don't you ask about bechor? Even if it wasn't sanctified, that means once it was destroyed, it's not holy anymore. So why can't you ask about bechor too? Can you eat it? So he's saying, we're speaking about it wasn't really sanctified once it's not here anymore. Beis Hamikdash was only sanctified while Shlomo Melech was there. It's not sanctified. A bechor who was processed before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, The Charabais and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed now. Vadam Sarkayim. In other words, at the Churban of the Beis Hamikdash, when they destroyed it, they still had some chor meat there. Can you eat the meat now? That's the question. V'iskish b'saro l'damo. And how do we know that you can't eat the basar? Because there's a hekesh between the basar and the dam. Rashi quotes the pasuk. Take a look at Rashi a little bit below where we are. This b'saro dama. It says ves damam tizrok. Right? We had that pasuk many times about the bechor. This is b'saro dama. It says ves damam tizrok ves chelbam takdir. You should sprinkle the blood and burn the fats. Ubesaram yelecha, and the meats will be to you. Remember, we said, why does it say in plural? One says because there's different kinds of bechor shor, bechor kesef ways. Another one says because it applies also to Meiser and Pesach that you have to be makter the chaylev, bizorik the dam, and then you can eat the meat. So there's a hekesh between the basar and the dam. Ma dam of mizbeach, just like the dam has to be in mizbeach. When there's no mizbeach, you can't sprinkle the dam. Basar mizbeach, the basar also is only when there's a mizbeach. So that's how he knows. In other words, how did Rabbi Shmuel know? Rabbi Shmuel said, what do I do? Can I bring Meiser Sheni today and eat it in Yerushalayim? He says, no, you can't. Because by Bechor, it's compared to Bechor, either based on the Ma'atzat comparing, or based, we had a hekesh between Bechor and Meiser Sheni. Just like Bechor you can't eat Meiser Sheni either. How do you know you can't eat Bechor? You know why you can't eat Bechor? Because it's compared to the dam. If you can't do the dam because the Mishbeach is not here, can't eat the meat either. So that's what means the hekesh, so the hiskish b'sor l'dam. So the basar is compared to the dam. Ma dam mizbeach, b'sor mizbeach. What about Meiser Sheni? Meiser Sheni v'al b'chor. We said there's actually Meiser Sheni b'chor. So number one, we say if there's no dam, you can't eat it, and if you can't eat it, there's a hekesh between eating the b'chor and Meiser Sheni. So now the Gemara says our famous question: how do you know that you can't eat the basar of a bechor if the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? You did shchiting balachas rika, and now the mizbeach and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. How do you know you can't eat it? Because it says it's domo yisrog, that's basar yochal. Okay, if you could be zarek the dam, you can eat the basar. Not if you already was zarek the dam. In other words, when you're capable of being zarek the dam, then you're capable of eating it. If you can't be zarek the dam because the bech is not here, can't eat it either. Once you can't eat the bechor, how do we know meiser? Because there's a hekesh between meiser and bechor. But then we're going A to B and B to C, and by kachim you can't do that. Back to our chart from Memtes, right? If there's a hekesh between dam and basar, dam teaches you to basar, and basar teaches you to meiser sheni. So how could you learn out meiser sheni from if meiser sheni is C? And the bechor meat is B and dam is A, how can you go from A to B and B to C? Right. So the Gemara says Meiser Dagan Chulin. Meiser Sheni is not kachim, it's Chulin. Just a halacha, you have to give it to the Levi. Or if it's Meiser Rishon, you give it to Levi. If it's Meiser Sheni, Meiser Rishon, you give it to Levi. Meiser Sheni, you take to Yerushalayim, you eat it. It's not kachim. You don't eat it in the Beis Hamikdash. You can eat it anywhere you want, right? You don't have to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash at all. Says says the first answer is Meiser Dagim is only Chulin. That's if you look at C. So C, you learned A to B, Dam to Basar, and then Basar to Meiser Sheni. So you said C is Chulin, so it's not a problem. That's if you look at the thing that's learned out. If you look at C and C is not Kachim, then you don't have a problem. The whole business, that whole chart is only by Kachim, not by Chulin. And if you look at the thing that's teaching you, B is teaching C, A is teaching B, and B is teaching C. If you look at the thing that's teaching, the teacher, not the thing that's learned out, B is Meiser Bechor, is the meat of Bechor. That is Kachim. Michael Member. So what are you going to say? You're going A to B and B to C. The answer is Damu Basar Chad Mil C. It's really one thing. And as it says, it's Damo Yizrok, that's Basar Yochal, that goes together. It's not like it's a hekesh, one's learned out from the other. You can only eat the Basar if you're capable of being Zarek the Dam. B'shah Sha'ata, in the time that you roy Lizrek as a Dam, if it's fit, at a time when it's fit to be Zarek the Dam, because the base of the Mizbech is there, then you can eat the Basar. Below Achashaneris, not after the base of the Mizbech was destroyed. Therefore, it's not A to B and B to C. A is really both of them together. Basar goes together with Dam. When you could eat, the drasha is not that you can eat the basar with the dam. When you're zarek the dam was already basar. It's teaching you that when you're capable of being zarek the dam, you can do the basar. That's considered like one thing, and therefore it's only A to B. And even if you say that you look at the malamed and the one that's teaching is kachim, that's bechor, and therefore it would be a problem A to B and B to C. There's no A to B and B to C. It's all A. It's only A to B. Now So that's what Abaye said. So what was he? We started off by saying, what happened? Rabbi Elazar said mizbeach that was damaged. You can't eat the korban mincha there. It says achlu matzah seitz mizbeach, and that's kachir kachim. We learn out kachir kachim. Other kachir kachim like chatas and osham also cannot be eaten if there's no mizbeach. What about kachim kalim? What about kachim kalim? So Abaye says, look at this drasha of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said, name Rabbi Shmuel's drasha over here. That what? That if there's no mizbeach, right? If there's no mizbeach, you can because he asked, can you eat ma'aser sheni? Can you eat ma'aser sheni? So look at bechor. Bechor is kachim kalim, and we see when there's no mizbeach, you can't eat the meat. That's exactly how we came out. When the mizbeach isn't there, when it's not complete, you can't eat the meat, even if you did shechita kabbalah chazrika when the mizbeach was there. And then the Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the mizbeach and destroyed the base of Mikdash, and you have the meat. There's no mizbeach, you can't eat the meat. Okay, so that's what he said. That's what Abaye brought down, that from the drasha of Rabbi Yossi, who said the name of Rabbi Shmuel, this was the drasha that he learned. You can't eat the answer was, he was answering that you can't eat ma'aser sheni, but incidentally he mentioned you can't eat the bechor, you can't eat ma'aser bechor, you can't eat the bechor's basar either. Okay. Kisolik Rabban Amteres Yisrael, Amar l'shmaita kamed Rav Yermeh. He said this shmaita of Abaye. Abaye answered this question. What about kachim kalim? How do we know that you can't eat kachim kalim when there's no mizbeach? So he brought down this drasha of Abaye that he said, name Rabbi Yossi and name Rabbi Shmuel, this drasha. So he said this. He said this in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who was one of the Marid Asra in Eretz Yisrael. Amar. So Rabbi Yirmiyah said, this is very common for them always to curse out. They always curse out the other yeshiva guys. Amar Bavloi Tapshoy. These Babylonians, Abaye brought this down. Abaye was from Babylonia. Right? So he said, Bavloi, these foolish Babylonians, because they live in a dark area. Bavel was low-lying, was very low-lying. It was always irrigated. It was low-lying. It didn't get much sun. They also said teachings which are dark. In other words, what is he talking about? Where did he get this from? You're saying you can't eat kachim kalim meat when there's no mizbeach? Kachim I understand, right? Like mincha, but you can't eat kachim kalim meat when there's no mizbeach. Lo shmielu, have you not heard the following thing? Tanya, b'shas shiluk masos in the Mishkan. When they went to the Mishkan, they went through the Midbar and they kept taking it down and moving, and they said travel. They took apart the Mishkan and carried the Mizbeach, Moshe's Mizbeach Nechoshes, that small one, right? Much smaller, not the Mizbeach Hazav, the Mizbeach Nechoshes. And when they took it down, B'shaslik Masos, Kachim Nefsom. When they took it down, the Kachim became puzzle, meaning because the Mizbeach presumably was not there, right? Right now. It doesn't mean that there was no considered. They still had the various encampments. Once you're in Yerushalayim, so there's three camps, right? There's the Machane Kahuna, which is the base of Mikdash, right? The Azara. Then you have the Machane Levi, which is Har Habayis, and you have Yerushalayim, which is Machane Yisrael. A Metzora has to leave Yerushalayim, has to leave all of them. At the time when they went through the Midbar, he had to leave all the various encampments, all 12 tribes, leave the whole area. So even though they took down the base of Mikdash, etc., the Mishkan, right? But Kachim would become puzzle. But Zav Masram Mishtach had to be sent out. And Mitzor had to go out of all three encampments, and the Zavim had to go out of Machne Leviyah, right? Tamei Mace is allowed to be the Machne Leviyah, but the Zavim had to leave the Machne Leviyah. So you see, even though they were traveling, they traveled together with their encampments, and they had to follow the rules. Mitzor had to leave all of them. Zavim had to leave Machne Leviyah. Okay, and the Kachim were puzzle. Another Brisa said, B'shnei Mekomos Kachim Nechalim. In two places, the kachim are eaten, even presumably kachim when they're fixed, when they're encamped, and even apparently when they're traveling. My love, kachim. So Rabbi Yirmiyah said, isn't one speaking about the kachim are considered to have left? In other words, when he said once they took down, they were traveling with took apart the Mishkan and they were carrying it through, the kachim would be possible. Why? Because kachim have to be eaten where? Inside the Azara. Well, if they're traveling, the Azara is not there, so kachim can eat it. But kachim kalim, which can be eaten anywhere within Yerushalayim, within the encampments of all 12 tribes, the char would be okay. That's why he says, either whether they're encamped or whether they're moving. So what do you see? The kachim kalim could be eaten even when there is no mizbeach there. There's no fixed mizbeach. So he tried to refute Abaye. Amar Ravina, no, eat the kachim kalim. Both these cases are speaking about kachim kalim. Both cases are kachim kalim. Below kasha, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbanan. Very simple. Rabbi Shmuel held what? That when there's no mizbeach, you can't eat the kachim column. That's why he said kachim nifsalim. And then we were traveling, you can't eat anything. You can't eat the kachim some because the mizbeach is not fixed in one place. Rabbi Shmuel, the top Rashi on the page. Rabbi Shmuel, the yolef basar midam, right? The first Rabbi Shmuel is the yolef basar midam. That's the first one that says, okay, just like if the dam is not there, you can't be zork the dam because mizbeach is wrapped up and traveling. It's not there, so you can't eat kashim kalim either. And the second brisa which says b'shnei makomos the kachim are eaten is speaking about what do you mean shnei makomos? When it's fixed or when it's moving, kachim kalim. But when it's moving, it goes like the Rabbanan who don't agree with Rabbi Shmuel. They go with like with what Yirmiyah wanted to say. So Rabbi Yirmiyah tried to disprove and say, look, kachim kalim can be eaten, and it can be eaten even when there's no mizbeach. No. One brisa says they can't be eaten. That's Rabbi Shmuel. The other brisa says it could be eaten. That would be the Rabbanan. That was one answer. Right? B'boy Seima, we're on Samach Aleph now. It's a long daf. B'boy Seima, right? Or you could say hava kachim. They're both speaking about kachim. In other words, kachim kalim can be eaten for sure. Even kachim, it doesn't mean to say haba kachim, but not kachim kalim. The Mefarshim say it means even kachim. Makes no difference. Why? Umay shnei makomos. What does it mean? Kodem shemid alavida mesel mashkan. Kodem does not mean before they put up the Mishkan, because before they put up the Mishkan, there was certainly a mizbeach. It means one is while the mizbeach is there and the Mishkan was there, and one is la'achar sheyifuku as a Mishkan. See, when they put the Mishkan up, Rashi explains the Mishkan was first put up, and then they set up the mizbeach. When they took it apart, the Mishkan came up first, and the mizbeach was still there. So it means this one is when the Mishkan was still there, right? B'shnei makomos, when the Mishkan was still there, and one is when the Mishkan was taken apart, but the mizbeach was still there. That's what he means. B'shnei makomos. In other words, both are speaking about when the when he says b'shas siluk misbos kachim nifsolin. All right, kachim are puzzle at that point. When there's no mizbeach, maybe we're speaking about kachim. That kachim kalam could be eaten. But when he said b'shnei makomos kachim ne'acholin means even kachim, but it means one is when the mizbeach is there, right, with the Mishkan, and one is when the mizbeach is there without the Mishkan. Mishkan, right? What's the point here? Mao is saying if Slobiyot that when the Mishkan's not there, it's considered that they left the Azara. Right? Kamashma, we don't say that. Maybe it should be puzzle. Amakrava nasa ol moed. The moed travels. Alpha pisha nasa ol moed. Even though it's traveling, it's still considered the ol moed. So he's saying like this: when the mizbeach is there, if there's a mizbeach there, you can eat the kachim. That's what it means. Whether if the Mishkan was dismantled totally, then there's not there, right? But if the Mishkan is there, right, that you could still but also omoid. If if Mishkan is intact, even if it's moving, if it's intact, you can it's still considered Mishkan. Therefore, you can eat it, not possibly Yotze. But this question about if there's no mizbeach, can you eat the kachim kalam or not, seems to be a machlokas. Rabbi Shmuel says you may not, and the Rabbanan say that you may, and that's what this is dependent on. We'll pick it here tomorrow. Could you do that? I mean, right, well, yeah. The question is, can you eat it? Can you eat it? Well, if the mizbeach is not there at all, you can't shecht it. We said if the mizbeach is not there, if it's been dismantled, you can't shecht. You can only bring a carbon when you could sprinkle the dam. If the mizbeach is wrapped up and traveling, and moving around, you can't be zarek the dam. If it's damaged, you can't bring it. No. The question is, if it's damaged and you already was zarek the dam, can you still eat it? No, that's a machlokas. According to Rabbi Shmuel, you may not. According to Rabbanan, you may.